This is Standing Watch. And now, Evangelist Norbert Link.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Standing Watch program. Kyle Rittenhouse was charged in a closely watched television and televised trial with murdering 2 protesters and with other felonies. The New York Post wrote on November 19. Not guilty on all counts. That verdict comes as no surprise to anyone who'd paid close attention to the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, but may shock those who relied on horrifically biased and false media accounts. He did not bring the gun across state lines. He had major roots in Kenosha, including his day job, and much of his family, including his father, lived there. Absolutely nothing suggests he was a white supremacist, as no less than Joe Biden claimed right before last year's election. And the men he shot were all attacking him when he pulled the trigger. All were white, and at least 2 had histories of violence. And then the article continues to say this should teach everyone once and for all not to trust agenda-driven reporting. We totally agree that the mass media has been guilty of horrible reporting and misrepresentations. On November 17, prior to the verdict, the New York Post listed 10 misrepresentations and outright lies by the media. The mass media, in this case. Now, some of them were this. 1. He killed 2 Black Lives Matter protesters. False. All 3 of the men he shot were white. 2 of them, of course, he killed. 2. He took an AR-15 across state lines. False. His rifle was kept in a safe at his best friend's stepfather's house in Kenosha. 3. The gun was illegal. False. Under Wisconsin law, he was entitled to possess the AR-15 as a 17-year-old. The judge dismissed the gun charge, which the prosecution never should have brought in the first place. 4. His mother drove him across state lines to the riot. False. His mother did not. 5. He was an active shooter who took his gun to a riot looking for trouble. Quote, a 17-year-old kid just running around shooting and killing protesters, said MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who drove across state lines with an AR-15 and started shooting people up. He called Rittenhouse a self-appointed militia member unloading 60 rounds. All false. He did not fire 60 rounds, not even close to that. 6. He is a white supremacist, as then-candidate Joe Biden labeled him in a tweet showing the teenager's photograph. No evidence for that. And 7. He wore surgical gloves to cover his fingerprints. No evidence for that either. Kyle Rittenhouse, a lifeguard and paramedic, wore gloves because he was giving first aid to injured protesters. But you see, my friends, it's not over. It's not over. President Biden said after the verdict, he is concerned and angry. And Kamala Harris said that work needs to be done regarding our justice system. Left-wing radicals, politicians, continue with the accusations against Rittenhouse, and the left-wing media supports them, calling the acquittal a miscarriage of justice and much worse. It is an obvious attempt to provoke the other side, and that is very dangerous. Movements like this could be responsible for the creation of civil war. This country is already divided as it has never been before since the Civil War. And that is very, very dangerous, and some may very well have in mind to bring about civil war through their conduct and through their actions. In addition, important evidence about the prior criminal conduct of the two persons Rittenhouse killed was suppressed, never came before the jury. Now, thankfully, the jury made the right decision based on Wisconsin law, but it could have been much different. Fox News reported on November 16, prior to the verdict. Hours before the fatal encounter, Joseph Rosenbaum had been released from a local hospital in the wake of a suicide attempt. He had pending charges in Wisconsin for alleged domestic abuse and jumping bail at the time of his death. In December 2002, a court in Pima County, Arizona, sentenced him to a decade in prison on child molestation charges. He spent just over 14 years in prison and committed dozens of disciplinary infractions. Moments after Rittenhouse fatally shot Rosenbaum, 26-year-old Anthony Huber chased after the teen and hit him with a skateboard. Rittenhouse then fatally shot Huber in the chest. Anthony Huber was convicted of domestic abuse and disorderly conduct in 2018. He also served a prison stint in 2012 for choking his brother. Now, as I said, this evidence was never brought to the eyes of the jury. It has been suppressed. Of course, the idea is like, well, it would have been prejudicial and, Rittenhouse didn't know anything about that, so therefore it wasn't material and relevant. That is not necessarily true at all, because it would show whether those two people who have been killed were peaceful, quiet demonstrators and protesters, or what their state of mind was in light of the prior conduct. But you see, this is a reason why we are telling our members not to serve on a jury, because evidence might be suppressed like it was in this case. Plea bargainings might be reached which may not reflect the true facts. A person might be convicted because of circumstantial evidence, something which the Bible does not at all support. You need to have two witnesses to convict a person. And many other reasons are there. In other words, you are not allowed to have a conscience with which to go into the jury deliberation room. You have to leave the Bible outside the jury deliberation room, because you're not allowed to look at God's law if it is in contradiction to man's law, and on the problems go. So, to summarize at this point, Rittenhouse was not a villain. He was not a vigilante. He is not a domestic terrorist, a white supremacist, a self-appointed militia member, all these accusations and allegations which have been made against him. But as I said, this is not necessarily over. People are now suggesting that the survivors of those two who have been killed should file civil lawsuits for wrongful death. And others are suggesting that Rittenhouse should file libel and slander and defamation lawsuits against the mass media, including CNN and MSNBC, and perhaps even President Biden, who was not the president when he made his comments. But I do agree with the statement in the New York Post of this article of November 19, which I quoted earlier, which says, none of this makes him a patriot. Or with Professor Dershowitz, who warned against idolizing Rittenhouse and making him out to be a hero, as he said on Newsmax television on November 19. Although much in an article which was published by USA Today on November 18, prior to the verdict, is undoubtedly objectionable and wrong, there was one point made which I believe was correct. Here it is. What did this boy think would happen if he carried an AR-15 type rifle into the chaos that warm summer night? Some people argue he is a positive role model for other young people. He saw a problem, he took action, he stood up when the police stood down. We live in a society where guns have become a fetish for some people who claim they are protecting the public. It's an illusion, and it's dangerous. My father died 20 years ago, but I know exactly what he would say about the events in Kenosha. He would tell his teenage son, "Don't you ever do something so stupid. You stay home and stay out of trouble." You see, Rittenhouse actions do not represent a positive role model for young people to follow. No matter what man's law may say, Christ tells us not to take up the sword or the gun, but to put it away. Because everyone who takes the sword or the gun will ultimately perish by it. You can read that in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 52. Using a gun against another person with the intent to kill for whatever reason is wrong in the eyes of God. And so, we tell our members to be conscientious objectors and not to participate in demonstrations, especially when they are not peaceful. Now the communists, the socialists, left-wing radicals, and others are marching in America's streets, protesting against the acquittal. No one of a sound mind should participate in those demonstrations or counter-demonstrations, because they can become very violent. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 3 says, "A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." This is not God's world. We are not here to make this world a better place. This world is ruled by Satan, the devil. He is a god. He is the ruler of this world. He gives authority to whomever he wants to, of course subject to God allowing it. But he said that to Christ, and Christ didn't dispute it. All attempts to improve this satanic world will fail. If Christ were not to come back and to shorten the days of the Great Tribulation, no human being would survive. We should pray for God's kingdom to come, not for Satan's world to be improved a little. For more information, I challenge you to ask for 3 of our free booklets: The Gospel of the Kingdom of God, the 10 Commandments, and Should You Fight in War? And this book in particular goes into many of the issues I have addressed today. So thank you very much for listening. This is Norbert Link for the Standing Watch program.
Standing Watch is a presentation by The Church of the Eternal God, P.O. Box 270519, San Diego, California 92198. More information is also available at our website, eternalgod.org.